Hello again and welcome back to Kingdom Tales. I'm Father Lee and together we're reading from The Tales of the Restoration by David and Karen Maines. This is the third book in their Tales of the Kingdom series. Have you ever been lost before? Have you ever walked off in one direction or another direction and not known where you ended up? Do you remember what it felt like to be off on your own? When I was younger, a group of friends invited me to come with them exploring a cave. Now, you should never explore a cave by yourself. We had grown-ups with us, and we had maps of the cave. We had people with us who had already been there before, and yet, even with all of those precautions, we got turned around and didn't know where we were. For a long time, we sat by ourselves, just waiting and watching and hoping that we would find our way, sitting there all alone in the dark. It's a very scary feeling inside of us when we don't know where we are and we don't know how to get back to where we're trying to go. It makes us feel very, very alone. But the truth is that you and I are never truly alone. Today's story is called Peril at Burning Place. Hiro kicked the ashes at his feet. Having walked Amanda to the mouth of the path that led through the garbage dump, he now stood in the ashen field of Burning Place. She was making another night crossing, and he was uneasy. With so many power-outs, the dark things had become bold. "Amanda," he asked, "do you have to go at night?" "Yes." She was eager to arrange a great park transport, so the remaining muddy play plazas could be transplanted and provide no more ammunition for riots in the streets. She and Ranger Commander had agreed to this haste. "You know better than to worry about me," she chided, buttoning the collar of her blue runner's jacket. She knelt to tighten the strap that secured her felt running boots. "You know that I can detect the deceits as well as any. It is a crossing again, which I have made countless times, and I'm not afraid. I am never out of the company of the king." Hiro grinned at the confidence in her tone. Even in childhood, Amanda had been sure of her gifts and sure of the strength she derived from being sister to the king. "Well," Hiro said, teasing, "don't go too far without a weapon. You obviously left yours somewhere else." He pulled his silver-bladed woodsman's hatchet from its sheath and offered it to her. Surprised, Amanda patted her belt. Sure enough, it was empty. She turned, searching the ground. Had she set it aside here? No. Where could she have left the hatchet? How could she have been so careless? Hiro laughed, glad to best her for the sake of the old rivalry between them. "Well, see, you don't do everything perfectly. Take mine. You can't make crossing again and at night without a weapon." He paused, thinking, and then said, "In fact, why don't you keep it for the rest of your life?" With one hand, Amanda pushed the hair back from her temple. She was not happy about being dependent on someone else's gift for protection. Carelessness was not a good sign and could endanger many. And she had an uneasy feeling about where this conversation might lead her. There had been other comments from Hiro that she had successfully ignored. "Cree, cree." The watchtower horns blasted again. Day's end was approaching. The signal warned any lingerers still outside the walls that night was near, and dark things would soon be creeping out of the garbage dump. The carillons of the city had rung an hour before, calling people from work to home and family and dinner. Amanda fastened Hiro's hatchet in her belt and pulled up her collar against the evening cool. "I'll keep it for crossing," she said, "but I can't possibly keep it for life." Hiro muscular and agile, stood beside her. He was no longer the lad who had fled from the enchanter's orphan dragnet, believing old folk tales about a place where trees grew. He had worked with all the fighters of the resistance and now was a ranger leader in the restoration. He was one of the king's choice men. Amanda, he said softly. There was a question in the way he pronounced her name. To keep her from running along before she had answered his inquiry, he placed his hand gently upon her arm. The young woman, as brave as any man beside her, as dedicated to the work of the restoration, dared not look into his eyes. She knew she must not hesitate in her answer, for in her heart, Amanda loved Hiro as much as she loved any who were near or dear to her. He was part of the memories of her youngsterhood. They knew one another growing, and she was proud of who he had become. It was Hiro who had befriended her at the time of her greatest failure, when, through disobedience, she brought fire to Great Park. It was he who had led her back again through the circle of sacred flames to the king. And as she had once taught him the ways of the field and forest, it was Hiro who taught her the ways of the streets. Together they had infiltrated Enchanted City to fight in the underground resistance. Together they had stood at Burning Place and watched death and darkness and at last new day rising. Assured as she seemed, she always had drawn strength from his strength. Never wavering in the king's cause, Hiro was a brave and loyal subject of the kingdom. To look at him now and to see him deeply would show that he was alone and needing a stay-beside person for the rest of his life. Her resolve would weaken. But it was her very seeing, the gift of inner sight, that insisted she refuse him. She was of the meadows and streams. Her heart was firstmost in Great Park. With clarity, she knew she would never be able to stay beside him for the rest of life, because he was of the city. This place of work and struggle and frequent disappointment was firstmost for him. Hiro, she answered, still avoiding his glance, her eyes downcast. You love me because I'm the friend of your childhood. You love me because I'm of Great Park, and that place now fills you with home longing. The work here in the city is hard and tiring. You love me because you know me and are comfortable in knowing me, but to stay beside one another for life, this'll never be. It's not meant to be. I know it. I can see it. You must trust my seeing. He pulled her closer, and though she had grown tall, he was taller still. Lifting her chin with his hand, her eyes now met his. Behind them, the sun rolled downward, darkening the flying banners, the flags and towers of Bright City. Clouds bowed, bumping before the display of another day's end. Amanda, he said, I'm not going to beg. Just tell me. Tell me that you don't love me. If you say so, I will never speak to you of this again. Gently, she drew away and faced the garbage dump, then walked away down the path. He knew her too well. She could not say the words to him. She could not say, I do not love you, without his knowing that she lied. A little beyond his reach, she turned to gaze at him. Her words sounded firm, slightly harsh even to herself. You love what you cannot have, and don't love what you have that is far better than the love that you do love. You must understand. I never want to talk about this again. Amanda turned with such determination and started to jog so quickly into the garbage dump that Hiro was convinced that she had meant what she said. All his persuasions would never change her stubborn mind. He watched her run away, not waving farewell, not calling out the words of coming and going the city workers always spoke, to the king, to the restoration. And Amanda was too far away, too fast for Hiro to see the tears streaming down her cheeks. She had done a hard thing that hurt her as well as her valiant friend. He had been refused. Despair flooded him. How could he continue the tiresome work in Bright City alone? He needed someone to stay beside him for life, to make the tasks bearable, to make the disappointments lighter, to share the joys and satisfactions. He needed someone like Amanda, who always saw the king, someone to whisper sighting when his own seeing was dim. If she did not love him, who could? Raw with disappointment, aloneness churning in his soul, Hiro wandered westward around the wall to Burning Place. There was another watchgate entrance on this side of the wall walk. Dark was near, and nightlife would soon come creeping. He dared not stay outside the gate without his hatchet. Seasoned warrior though he was, fighting off deceits without weapons would leave him vulnerable to treachery. Cree, cree, the horns blared. He must go in. The gates would be closing. Yes, he thought, just a minute to absorb this blow. He called out, "Watch! Watch!" to let the rangers in the tower know a lingerer was still outside. How appropriate. His heart burned with disbelief that she could refuse him so finally, and here he was, standing in the ashen field. Angrily, he kicked the soot at his feet. Gray puffs rose and then settled. He kicked again and again. This is the place where dreams die, he thought grimly to himself. He recalled the awful time when the king had been dragged from the traffic court, a condemned man. He could almost hear the jeers of the fire priests, their bells jangling, the screams of the people of Enchanted City, and the howling laughter of the conniving enchanter. In his mind's eye, he saw the flames around the burning pyre blaze higher and higher, the form of the king thrusting and shadowed in the fiery torture. He felt again the evil darkness that had descended on the night to end all nights, when hope was gone and the people of Enchanted City gathered and knelt weeping or stood stunned and silent in the ashes of this terrible field. Something clattered beside him. Something cold caught his ankle, wound around. What? It looked like a chain root that had just sprung out of the ashes. Hiro tried to yank away, but the tether held firm. If only he had his hatchet. The wind swirled, blowing ashes wildly around him. He was blinded by the gray, dusky fog. "Watch! Watch!" Hiro cried. Too late. A deceit of sightlessness. He could no longer see the last rays of day's end, or the lamplights which the rangers would begin to fire upon the walls at this hour. One last horn should blare, but the deceit muffled sound, and he could hear nothing. Hiro knew, seasoned warrior that he was in for a struggle. "Watch!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. Was no one listening? "Scar boy," hissed a low voice from somewhere close. "Scar boy." His childhood name. Couldn't the dark things do better than that? That old name no longer frightened him. He was not a child, terrified of branding or haunted by death drums. As a child at branding, he had struggled, and his face had been seared by a burner with a hot iron. It was the enchanter's mark for all to see. But the king had healed his scar at New Day's Rising. He was a king's man, and the king had taken away the scar that always shamed him. "My name is Hiro," he shouted. "I'm a king's man." No, if the dark things were going to strike fear into his soul, they would have to do better than this. But he must get free from this tethering root. From out of the thick ash fog, something sharp jabbed him in the back, a poker in the hand of a burner. The young man tried to swing round, but the tether tripped him. He stumbled, ducked, swung again, hoping to catch the handle of the prod, to wrest it from his invisible adversary and have a weapon of his own. Oh! Something hard hit him in the back of the knees. Hiro stumbled forward. The tether yanked him short and tripped him to his knees. The deceit over his eyes thickened. He was alone at Burning Place with no one to fight beside him and no one to cover his hind side. "I'm a king's man," he shouted. "It's not dark yet. It's only a deceit." Said the whispering voice. "That may be, but still you cannot see." "Scarboy!" The jab again, this time harder. They were playing tough games. There was silence. And then a slow beat began, soft, ominous. Umfa, umfa, umfa. The gathering drums, the signal for dark things to draw near. Hiro located the sound. From there and over there came the drum beat. 3 beaters at least. Then waiting. Silence only the drums signaling, calling dark things forth. Then came a familiar voice in his ear, a voice filled with terrible knowing. "She does not love you. She does not love you. No, no, no." A wind blew across Burning Place, cold, paralyzing. Hobbled, sightless, alone in a field of ashes, Hiro felt a knife of terror like an ice pick thrust into his heart. The enemy knew his deepest, most hidden fear. "Watch!" he cried, now on his hands and knees. "Watch!" But his voice was choked. He no longer believed he could be heard. He no longer believed that anyone wanted to hear him. Huddling, he drew up to his hands, ducking his head beneath them to protect himself, to cover his neck and ward off the blows and jabs. Something pushed his face into the ashes. Soot smashed against his eyes, his ears, his nose. He breathed ashes into his lungs. The stink gagged him. He tried to scream. A shuddering gasp sucked up the ash into his mouth. And suddenly he was so tired. Tired of the work, tired of power outs, tired of city people. He was tired of a life of struggle. It was true. Amanda did not love him, could not love him. No matter how hard he fought, no matter how much command he assumed in the restoration, she would never love him. Something soft pushed against his side, something gentle and kind. Was there aid? Hiro leaned for a moment against this invisible comfort. Then the soft thing whispered beside him intimately, like a friend, "And you don't see the king so well either, do you?" Hiro jerked away from the pretender, first the deepest fear, now the most terrible truth. Others in the restoration saw the king with ease. Even Little Child had known the street sweeper in the middle of the mobbing riot. All sightings came to Hiro by hard-won discipline and determined effort. How could he be a worthy ranger leader if he did not sight the king? In just a few moments outside the city walls, with night descending, he had been reduced to terror. He knew the rule: it's dangerous to be a one only. He regretted his carelessness. The worst deceit of all came pressing hard against him. Slumber longing. His eyes felt heavy. He could hardly push up to his knees. Poke, prod, club. Dark things harassed him as he moved up, get up. He must fight against the staggering weight. To be still. To give way, to cease. No, up, up. Stand, stand. He tried to cry, watch, once more, but the ashes clogged his throat. He spit to clear his mouth. He gagged on the vile, choking stuff. The king, he was so tired. The king, sleep need like a drug paralyzed his mind. The king, heart sickness clutched his chest and squeezed. Hiro moaned. He stumbled again, righting himself. Night ailment grabbed the back of his neck and would not let go. Pure terror now throbbed in his blood at his temple with each heartbeat. He fought back with the last ounce of his will. This is not real fatigue. This is not real darkness. There is sound outside this deceit and light. To the king, Hiro cried, desperate. The voices whispered back, but the king's not here. He will not come. Hiro cried again one last time, to the king, to the restoration. Then there was a yammering. He was shoved by dark things he couldn't see, and then a voice, another voice above the commotion, or beneath it, or behind it. It said, I am near. I am near. Who had spoken? Hiro strained to hear. Was it the king or another deceit? Hiro coughed. He spat ashes out of his mouth. To the king, he cried again. Again the new voice. But this time laughter. A laugh Hiro knew and loved. It was not mockery. It was not a taunting jeer. It was the laugh of a conqueror, and it called, I am very near. Nearer than you know. Do not be afraid. How often had he heard that laugh before, heard it in the very morning of new day rising, heard it at Burning Place, this very place where the king's fire had flamed after despair, here where the holy light had been tossed above the heads of the dancers, and here where the great celebration finally came to the city. The king lifted the evil enchantment through absolute power and through conquering joy. Joy was here at Burning Place again, now, in this very moment. Hiro saw a tumbling light, piercing the deceit of sightlessness. Hiro could hear the hum of battle thrilling in the air above him. The deceit of soundlessness had been destroyed. A command came, catch. He grabbed the falling, turning handle of a fighting hatchet that had been tossed his way. Then the king's voice again, to arms! I'm at your hind side. Hack! Hiro swung widely in front of him. Hack! Hiro could now see dark things hunkering away in the faint last rays of day's end. He could see lamplights burning brightly on the wall walk. Cree, cree! As soundlessness fled, he could hear the watchtower horns blaring the last warning before nightfall. Hack! Hiro cut away the entangling chain root that trapped his ankle. He heard laughter behind him and turned to see the king, young and battle-strong and confident, parrying with two burners who were attempting to inch across the ash field toward the garbage dump. Cree, 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 cree! The horns blasted in double time, calling rangers to the battle. From the city, men and women bearing torches approached the circle of combat in which two warriors stood back to back. That, and take that! Hiro bested one burner of a poker. He thrust another with a death blow. A breaker's cudgel fell to the ground. Dark night came finally, but flames lit the circle of protection. All the enchanters' horde, trapped within the torches, scrambled to scurry beyond its reach, beyond the sure thrusts of the king's hatchet, beyond the now furious backwhacks of Hiro's weapon. Is the gate secured? The king called, not wanting any of the fleeing nightlife to creep toward the city. Gate secured! Advance! With that, the fighting men and women, holding the ends of their torches in one hand, began to move the shadows and the power pretenders back toward the garbage dump. Realizing they were outnumbered, the terrorists turned and ran, yowling and wailing. They had crept out against a one only, but they had been bested by the king and his many. Sweat stood on the foreheads of the combatants. They wiped it off and straightened their garments. The king thrust his hatchet into the ashes to clean it. The silver of his clasp flashed in the flare of the torches. "Lost your weapon?" he asked. Hiro cleared his throat. He knew it was perilous to be outside the walls, alone, without a fighting hatchet. The king must wonder why he allowed himself to be caught at such a risk. He took a deep sigh. I'll lend it to Amanda. She's crossing tonight. Think she'll be all right?" The king grinned, raised his hands at his side, and shrugged his shoulders. "Amanda? You can't be worried about the Princess Amanda." "Right," Hiro reminded himself. Amanda always made crossing successfully. In fact, she might be approaching Great Park already. A little humility was necessary. It was he who had required protection. Facing the king, Hiro grinned back and raised his hatchet above his head. The king lifted his, then crossed the neck of the other handle, hooking two into one. A joint rescue. "How long were you beside me?" He tucked the hatchet into his belt. "Oh, since your first watch cry." Hiro groaned. Why was sighting so hard for him? He said, "I guess I just couldn't see you." "No," said the king. "It was more that you weren't really looking for me." They walked back toward Watchgate entrance, the ranger protectors falling into ranks behind them. Hiro paused to view the procession of rangers climbing toward the city, their torches flaming. He thought, "These are my people, the ones to whom I will always belong." The king threw his arm around the shoulder of his fellow fighter and smiled. "You always had trouble at sighting, haven't you? A good fighter, a brave worker, a choice leader. But seeing, well, that's Amanda's task, right?" The king was speaking out loud Hiro's most secret, most terrible truth. "Listen to me," said the king, as they stood together outside the gate. Fellow and sister fighters passed and called. "Knight's good eve. Good job done." The ranger cry surrounded. "To the king, to the restoration. To the king, to the kingdom." Hiro looked into the face of the king and knew everything His Majesty had said was true. He was often too busy with other important things to really look for the king. "Listen to me," said the king again. "Though I have many things to do in many places, I am always near. In battle, I am at your hind side. In duty, I am at your working hand. In slumber, I bend to protect you. In loving, I am your heart song. In great celebration, I am always, always with you." The king grasped Hiro's shoulder with his right hand and said clearly, "You do not have to see me to find me. You do not have to hear me to know my words." As the ranger men and women passed, they began to sing. "He is always near. The king is always beside you. In battle at your hind side. In duty at your working hand." The song of the king traveled with the singers through the gates, into the night, through the streets of the city now preparing itself for slumber. As the rangers passed, people opened their windows or came to their doors or paused in the streets on their way home, and all joined their voices in song. In love I am your heart's song. In great celebration I am always, always with you. When all the company had passed through the watchgate entrance, and the torches flamed now in the lamplights upon the wall walk, and the sound of the song of the king was being carried throughout all bright city, Hiro heard his name called. The ranger leader turned, making ready to go his separate way. Yes, your majesty, he replied. The king answered, Hiro, there is one who loves you. Then he too was gone into the streets of the singing city, into the ease of night rest, into this good eve. And Hiro remembered the lesson that he had learned again and again through his living. Though alone, he was never really alone.